In today's video, we were talking about the new DJI O3 Air Unit, and I'm sure there's a lot of things that you guys are going to want to know, so we're going to get right on into it. What I think about it from the perspective of an actual FPV freestyle pilot. If this is something you guys want to invest in, let's go ahead and talk about some of the specifics. This video is probably going to get a little bit long, so there will be some timestamps below for you guys. But also, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them down below because I will do everything I can to answer every single one of them. I intended to make this video for the purpose of answering as much questions as I possibly could for those of you who actually like to fly freestyle and really care about this system, whether or not it's going to be a worthy upgrade for you in that respect. The transmission link is capable of doing 30 milliseconds up to 10 kilometers, which is a bit of a downgrade from the old system, which is capable of doing 13 kilometers. And of course, we already know there are other digital systems that can do even further than that. So if you're looking to do some super long range, the O3 Air Unit system may not be for you per se, but I definitely have to say from the perspective of an actual FPV freestyle pilot, the range and penetration that I'm getting with this system is way better than anything else I've tried. And that's including the DJI system, the previous one that was using upgraded patch antennas and omnidirectional antennas, which I think was already really great in regards to range and penetration. This system is much, much better. The Air Unit is using two omnidirectional transmit and receive antennas at the same time, even though it looks like it's only one, so it's kind of more like the OG Air Unit in that sense, but it's nice to have a single antenna for the purposes of making TPU mounts and mounting the antenna and all that stuff like that, so you're not having it look too clunky. The O3 Air Unit is compatible with the Goggles V2 in case you guys are wondering, so if you happen to own those already, I highly recommend you just go ahead and hang on to those, get yourself some O3 Air Units, and you should be good to go. This one you're getting a full 1080p resolution in the goggles versus the 810p that you're getting from the Goggles V2. They work just as well. I'm really glad that DJI came out with that compatibility for these because that's great. The camera has the same 1x1.7 inch sensor that the DJI AVATA has, so the field of view is quite large at 155 degrees. With that said though, there is a 4:3 aspect ratio that does exist. It's not true 4:3 because it's essentially just the 16:9 with the edges chopped off, so I highly recommend you just use 16:9, unless of course you like to see maybe things that are more in the middle, kind of more to focus on in the center there, then you can go ahead and use 4:3. The actual video that you're seeing in the goggles is 1080p at 100 FPS with the Goggles 2, and it's using the H.265 codec, and that's the reason why it looks really, really good. The DVR alone looks freaking phenomenal, so even if you're just looking at DVR footage, not even what's recorded on the unit itself, really, really good. The unit itself does have an SD card slot that you can go ahead and shove one in there if you like to do that, but it's pretty cool because there is some internal storage. It says 32 gigabytes on paper, but it's more like 20 gigabytes. But nonetheless, it's nice to have some internal storage if you happen to not have your SD card. I did have a really peculiar situation where I was flying and it was like 1 in a million. I happened to hit a little branch just perfectly, and that branch actually hit the SD card just enough and popped it right out of the Air Unit on the side. And yeah, I had to go hunting for it, but I was really happy that I was able to find it eventually. Found the friggin' SD card in the dirt after it got fucking knocked out by these branches. Can't believe I found it, but I did. Still kind of lame that that even happened because I was horrified. I was really worried. I have had many crashes, and I have not had anything at all like that happen. The SD card has stayed in there nice and tight. Never once did I have it ever come out, so that shouldn't be a concern. I think this is just more like a one-off, really rare occasion. Just like with the AVATA, the system does shoot in descent alike if you want to go ahead and do more color grading and post-processing. That is definitely something that you can do. Or the actual color version that exists with DJI cameras really isn't that bad. If you guys want an example of that, I actually used the DJI Color, whatever the normal color was, not descent alike, in a video that I'll have linked down in the description below that I made with the AVATA. I actually think the colors look pretty decent. I didn't color grade that one at all. That was just the pure colors that DJI wanted to put in there, and it looked pretty good. As we all know, the digital FPV competition is definitely heating up, and that is absolutely a good thing because all these companies are really pushing each other to give us more and more what we want. In that respect, Rocksteady came out and they had canvas mode, and yes, the DJI O3 Air Unit absolutely does have full canvas mode support. Really happy to see this because I knew this was going to be a deal breaker for a lot of people, something that was going to absolutely push a lot of people over to Rocksteady. But now the system does definitely do that and has all the warnings, has Betaflight support, all that stuff. So it's pretty awesome to see that canvas mode is coming already on the DJI O3 Air Unit. The O3 Air Unit does have built-in stabilization using the Rocksteady technology. I don't like to fly with stabilization for freestyle per se because I'm more of a purist. I think your stabilization should really come from your sticks, your tune, your skill. But if you do like to fly with stabilization in freestyle, I highly recommend you check out the Rocksteady because it looks pretty dope. We're gonna go ahead and see an example of that here very shortly because I want you guys to know what it looks like. But you also have the capability of using gyroflow if you'd like to use that instead for your stabilization. I like gyroflow because you can really tweak how much stabilization or how little you want to use for your purpose. In regards to durability, I'd say that the system is pretty dang robust. I would say that the unit itself is just about on par with the Caddx Vista, and the camera itself is pretty darn durable. It does have a large lens, but that lens is really thick, and I've had some pretty harsh impacts directly into the camera, have not broken anything just yet, and that's also true with my AVATA. So I'm sure if you guys have watched any of my other videos where I demonstrated how bad I crashed the AVATA, I have yet to crack the lens or anything like that, so I'm pretty happy. But the antenna itself is a little bit worse for wear because I've had some really bad crashes on that. I think what would be better if you wanted to try to use this antenna or any antenna that works with the O3 Air Unit is if you had maybe an encased TPU antenna mount of some kind. It'd probably be your best bet to try to keep that thing safe. They made the camera compatible with any of the ND filters that you would happen to use for the DJI AVATA. So if you already own some of those, or if you're looking to get some ND filters for this camera, you can definitely look there. I'm using the Freewa ND filters. I think that they're pretty great. I've been using them for a while now, and I like them for that purpose. So let's go ahead and hop into the best way that I recommend that you actually install the O3 Air Unit. So there are two ways mentioned in the manual that you could do. You could do the first way, which would be to mount it right side up. And if you were to do that, as you can see, there's this bit of a bulge on the bottom side. If you were to remove the 4 screws, which is how they recommend you mount it, and then put this face down flush against the frame, it would be a bit of an awkward situation where the actual corners where the screws would be going into wouldn't be flush and flat, and therefore you could actually damage the outside of the air unit. So I highly recommend not doing it that way. I recommend that you mount it the other way, which is you actually flip it over. So as you can see, I actually have it mounted upside down, but in this method it's good because the top of the unit is perfectly flat. So the edges where the mounting hardware is actually connecting to the frame is nice and flat, so you're not going to have that issue that you would have if you were to mount it the opposite direction. I also recommend that you do not use any electrical tape or anything like that because there are slits on the sides, on all sides actually, that are intentionally there for the purpose of letting out heat. So the O3 Air Unit can very much overheat if it doesn't have proper airflow, and if you're blocking the airflow because you've used electrical tape to mount it, I don't think that's going to be really good for you. I think you should look into a frame that's going to properly mount the unit the way that it should be. It is 25 by 25 mounting as opposed to the Vistas, which were 20 by 20. I mean, the great thing though is they managed to actually keep the footprint, the size of the unit itself, rather small. It's roughly the same size as a Vista. It just uses 25 by 25 mounting instead of 20 by 20. It's really nice that the Quadmula Siren F5 split here in front of you is already set up to mount this unit because it is 25 by 25 mounting. And they also include the proper hardware that you would need to basically replace the screws. So you would use these 1.5 millimeter hex screws that would actually go through the frame and mount it nice and perfectly with the unit. You also want to make sure that you're not doing anything to block the USB-C cable port, as well as the SD card slot, so that you can continue to put in your SD card in order to get your recordings off of the unit itself. When it comes time to mounting the camera itself, it's really great that they were able to maintain the size of it roughly about 20 millimeters, so it's pretty much going to fit most frames that are already in existence, and it uses the same 2-screw mounting method that you'd seen in the OG DJI cameras. So that's nice that they really haven't changed anything there as far as the size of it. It still fits perfectly fine. But what I do recommend, unless you're spending a lot of time trying to get a really good tune and you really fly smoothly, so on and so forth, you might want to opt for a method of mounting it with TPU versus carbon. Because if you hard mount it against carbon, then you are more likely to get jello unless your tune is really solid. And if you're going to get a lot of jello in your flying and you intend to use that footage for cinematic purposes or even freestyle and stuff, if you want to try to use any stabilization or just not use stabilization, which I recommend, you're not going to really get a good result because you're going to see a lot of jello. So you might want to try to do it in this method, which is using TPU. This is a TPU replacement plates that Quadmula has made for the O3 Air Unit camera that replaces the standard carbon fiber plates that they would normally have there. There are 3 field of view modes that you can choose from with the DJI O3 Air Unit camera. That is super wide, wide, and normal. And if you do plan on using super wide, it is a very wide field of view, so it's very likely that you may end up getting some standoffs or even a top plate in the image that you might have to kind of go back and crop out a little bit further if you're doing post-editing, so on and so forth. Another thing too is it's very likely you're going to get the props in view unless you're using some sort of a very dead cat configured frame. And if that's the particular case, you can actually still kind of compensate for that by using like translucent black props is what I recommend. Those actually tend to sort of work best if you do happen to have the props in view. It becomes really not that noticeable. So I will demonstrate all that stuff for you in just a minute, so you'll see the options as far as field of view modes and how to kind of try to make it look good even if you do have the props a little bit in view. Okay, so one of the first questions I'm sure you guys are going to want to know about is whether or not the new O3 Air Unit works with this controller, and the answer is yes, it does. So that is pretty cool. The older Air Units used to work with the DJI FPV controller, the black one, the original one, and I kind of had an idea that this was probably going to be something you'd be able to use, and I'm glad they finally did implement it with the new O3 Air Unit. So if you already have this controller, then you're good to go. You've already got the goggles that say if you purchase the AVATA, and yeah, you don't really need anything else. You just need the Air Unit, install it in your own drone, and go out and fly. I'm not necessarily a big fan of this controller to use like full time. I would much rather use my own Radiomaster TX, but hey, this controller does work pretty well. If you do want to use this, if you're into those smaller like gamepad style controllers, this is a new option, which has never been before, so that's pretty awesome. The method that you're going to be connecting the O3 Air Unit to the flight controller is very similar to the OG DJI Air Unit in the fact that it uses a JST to JST cable that comes with the Air Unit. It does have 6 wires for the purpose of including the S-Bus and ground if you do plan on using the DJI Remote Control 2. The other 4 wires are going to be for your power and your ground, as well as the RX and the TX, which will connect to the TX and the RX to the flight controller for the purposes of using the MSP, canvas mode, enabled all that stuff in your OSD, as well as actually unlocking the unit when you go to ARM. If those things aren't working, it is very likely that the RX and the TX are actually swapped and you need to swap them back in order for that communication to occur. We are out here in the freezing cold to show you exactly how well the O3 Air Unit actually performs at night as an FPV camera. I wouldn't necessarily use this for footage for the purposes of making your videos and things like that because it's way too grainy. What you're going to want to do is bump up the ISO all the way up to max in manual mode. If you try to use auto, you will not be able to see anything at nighttime at all. But I would go ahead and throw like a GoPro on top of there with the proper night settings to really get that good footage. But yeah, this is exactly what it's going to look like for you guys when you actually try to fly at night. So now that I'm back from being outside in the cold to show you just how well the system flies at night, I do have a couple more things I want to touch on before we wrap up the end of this video. I will definitely have a freestyle edit at the very end that you guys can check out so you can see just how well the system performs in that use case and see if that's something that's going to really fit your needs and what you want and what you expect from the system. But overall, I'm going to leave you with my personal opinion of what I think about the O3 Air Unit. Will I be switching to it full time? Absolutely not. I'm definitely going to be keeping my Caddx Vistas for as long as I possibly can, especially because the promise of the backwards compatibility is coming soon with the Goggles 2 That's hopefully going to be here next month, but even if it goes another month or two after that, I would just be really happy to see that backwards compatibility. I'm planning on probably investing in 3 units total, one for like a daily driver freestyle quad where there's no need to get any additional action camera, so I can have a nice, really light quad that is really responsive and still gets good quality 4K footage. Another quad that I'm looking at getting one for would be like a cinematic rig, maybe like a 6 or 7 inch quad that I'm going to use for doing like good cinematic shots, but I'm probably going to be using like a GoPro Hero 10 Bones mounted to that thing and just primarily using the camera, the O3 unit, specifically for just FPV camera in that case. And the one I'm probably the most excited about is the Quadmula Siren F3 split. This particular quad is already set up to be able to mount the O3 Air Unit just fine, and it's going to be sub 250 gram with that Air Unit installed. So you're gonna have a really beastly 3-inch quad that can get 4K footage. Heck yeah, definitely sign me up for that. I hope this video has been incredibly informative for you so you can make a better buying decision whether or not you actually want to invest in the O3 Air Unit yourself. And if you did like what you saw here, definitely consider giving the video a thumbs up so that other people can see it as well. You're more than welcome to subscribe to the channel if you appreciate content coming from somebody who cares a lot about the FPV community. I try really hard to put out good relevant information for you guys so you can enjoy the hobby as much as I've been enjoying it. This is a big journey for all of us, and I really appreciate all your support. This kind of thing wouldn't even be possible if it wasn't for you guys. So thank you so much, and let's hop into some edits.
I'm facing back to front, over my shoulder at the sun, and it's an open door, and off my line of sight once more.